Hi, welcome to the Lift Podcast. My name is Paxton. I'm the Student Ministries Director here at High Point Church, and I'm joined by Eva and Lexi today. You guys want to say hi and introduce yourselves?
Hello, my name is Lexi, and I am on staff.
Hey, I'm Eva, and I'm 16.
There you go. Nice. Well, Eva, you picked a pretty heavy topic for this podcast, and I appreciate that. But
Yeah.
I'm excited, but also, I'm hopeful that I won't cry. But
We will try to make
That's
you
the
cry.
goal.
That's the goal.
But this is a really important topic. You wanted to talk about human trafficking.
Yep.
Can you tell us why you wanted to talk about that? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, my family has been traveling since I was 5, and my mom. That's just been something that my mom has really cared about. And so yeah, she just started that, and so now we have a thrift store thing, and so we work with women who have been trafficked. So that's why I wanted to talk about it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what does it mean to be trafficked? If obviously we know, but what if someone's listening and hasn't heard about that before? How would you describe that?
Well, women and children and sometimes men get taken from their homes and are sold into sex slavery, and so then they are forced into that.
Yeah.
by
And not
families.
just sex slavery, right?
Right. Other slavery
sometimes
too.
labor slavery too.
Right.
Yeah. And it's how big is this problem, would you say? Because not many people talk about that.
Right. Yeah. Here in the United States, it's huge. Here in Madison, it's a big problem. But globally, it's ginormous. It's a huge problem.
Yeah. 26 or 27 million people globally?
I
Do
think
you
it's
remember?
26.
I think. Yeah.
You can Google it. It's 26 or 27
Yeah.
million people globally each year are in the trafficking industry. And then
Right.
50,000 or 25 to 50,000 in the United
Yeah.
States each
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
That is a lot of people.
It's
It
a
is.
ton of people.
Especially every year.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
super tragic, like
So
you said.
sad.
People are being kidnapped and or sometimes willingly sold.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
Yeah, their parents or their boyfriends will sell them into it. Yeah.
That's a bummer. And there's a distinction between people are being trafficked for labor, that they're working. And then there's
Right.
also sex slavery, which is
Right.
prostitution,
Yeah.
except they're obviously not getting paid,
Right. Yeah.
which is terrible. But these people are being trafficked in the labor industry. They're the people who are manning the sweatshops or are working in the restaurant industry
Yeah.
or maybe are miners, but they're being used for their labor, what they produce, and
Right.
not being compensated at all, which is really, really sad.
Yeah.
Obviously, the sex slavery gets more press though,
Right.
but
Right. Yeah.
still both pretty gnarly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is a big problem. How does this relate though to being a Christian for you? Obviously you're following God.
Yeah.
How does that impact the way you think about human trafficking, if at all, or are they related in your mind?
Well, yeah, they're related. I don't know. I think that as Christians and as humans in general, we're called to love other people, and so it's important for us to do that in a way of reaching out to those who are being trafficked and showing the love of Jesus in that, and also bringing hope, the hope of Jesus, of him coming back and redeeming them, and I don't know, showing them that love.
That I think makes a lot of sense. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I want to ask, though, how does Yada do that?
Yada, well, we
Yada's your thrift store,
right.
that your
Yes.
family
Yada
runs.
is that. Yep. We take donations and we give the housewares, and the women come and shop, and they come and shop and get clothes for free. We give them the housewares so that if they want to move into a house, that they can have all the stuff for it. We find beds and stuff for them. And we work with a few organizations here that work with the women in general. You know what those organizations? I know one of them is Every Daughter, and then I think there's Zateo. I think there's one more, but I don't remember the name of it.
Yeah. I think the one I was thinking of earlier is Every Daughter. And I also know Zateo too.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Those
That's
are
cool.
pretty big ones.
So is it like your staff? The staff of the store are not previously human trafficked people, or they are?
No, they're not.
They're
no,
not.
they're
It's-
volunteers, and so they're like people who want to help be a part of this, like, I don't know, this cause. They can come and volunteer at Yada, and then no one really sees any of the women. My mom works with most of the women, but no one that volunteers will actually ever probably meet the women who have been trafficked.
I think in Every Daughter they do though. Right?
Yep. Yeah.
Because that's where one of my friends volunteers.
Okay.
She works there and she gets to work with the women,
Yeah.
which is really cool. Just the
Yeah.
stories we've heard, and we got to pray over them too, which is really cool.
That's so cool. Yeah.
How do these women it's the women who come and shop there, get clothes and household goods for free.
Yeah.
Is basically what you do. You're giving them resources. But how do they even get out of that situation to be able to buy clothes? Because like obviously if you're being trafficked, you're probably under duress. Like you're not going to try to leave most of the time. You're being threatened or held there
Actually-
under some circumstance.
Yeah. Well, like, they actually have a lot of, like, leniency with the people that traffic them. Like, they're normally, like, allowed to go back to their own house or whatever. And so it's less of, like, enslavement of, like, you're here all the time and you have to stay with me. It's more of, like,
I think they diminish your identity, and so
Right.
they say, "Oh, you're not like a child of God," is what you would say, and then they would say you're worthless, and then like from like the movies and like stories I've seen of just like how they diminish the women, and then they also like prove that, like, because even in Hosea is about a prostitute and how she kept going back into the slavery because she was like, oh, I'm not worth like my husband,
right.
and so she would keep going back, and so I feel like it's kind of like the same thing with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, definitely.
Reckless Love is another movie about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the women that we work with at Yada have come out of human trafficking, or have come out of sex trafficking, but they'll like return to it. And so that's what we're trying to like
Because
obviously
they feel
stop.
like their
Oh,
identity is in there.
Right.
So they have free will to leave. They just don't think they're worth anything because they feel so empty after all those years of being trafficked.
Yeah.
Or they
Yeah.
like told like you can have a purpose in doing
Well, it's
this
also,
work.
it's like
Yeah.
people are taking advantage of you without your consent, especially if you're going in there at like age 7.
Yeah.
Like you feel like you have nothing.
Yeah. And it tends to be a like trauma response. So if something that happens
Flight.
in their like day-to-day life that will like cause a trauma response, then they'll go back to the things that they know. And so that's something that like has really been an issue, is where they'll be fine and they'll be getting better, and then like one wrong thing goes like wrong, and then they'll go back to doing that.
Is that like specific? Obviously, I'm not. You might know better than me, but is that like specific to specifically American slavery? That this like whole notion of like I can roam freely around society, or is that like globally? Like, is it typical for that kind of indoctrination to happen where they don't need to keep a tight grip on the people that they're trafficking?
Most of the places I've been, that's true, I think. Like, well, we've only really seen it in like Amsterdam, where we took a trip there, and it's the same thing there, where they work in the red light district, but they can like leave and come back whenever, well, not really whenever they want. They're like, traffickers will be like, okay, you need to be here, and like if we don't find you, then something will happen, and we'll find you and you'll be punished.
Yeah, I don't know. Even just based off of Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
And that little girl, I don't think there was any chance of her leaving
Right.
because someone had to literally go and get her. And then I'm pretty sure they ended up knocking out the dude or killing the dude. I don't remember which one it was, but they had to put him out so that they could get her to freedom.
Sound of Freedom
Right.
is a movie.
Sound of
Yes.
Freedom is a movie.
For those who don't know.
Yeah.
It's a Christian movie. That's amazing. Highly recommend seeing it.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, and that was more of like, I think that's more in like the third world countries
Yeah, I agree.
where the women don't really have any other options because they don't
They need
make
money.
money. Right. So,
So
this
at this
comes-
place, they have a roof over their head. They have food.
Right. And that was actually my initial like thinking of like, what is human trafficking like? Like, oh, they are literally stuck there and someone needs to come and like pull them out.
yeah.
Versus like, I can see how if you indoctrinate like from childhood, a young girl or a young boy to think that if they leave, they're going to have nothing, that they
Yeah.
would come back to it. Like that seems like, sad to say, that is a good strategy for human trafficking in a free society.
Especially in America.
Yeah.
Because then
We're-
you can get by because it feels like, or it seems like to outsiders, that they are living a normal life, but
Right.
they've been basically brainwashed into doing what you're asking them to do
Yeah.
Yep.
and suffering in that state,
Yeah.
which is terrifying. That
Yeah,
that
it's
happens.
crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah.
And how does that, like, what if you were talking to someone who maybe was critical of Christianity, say, and they ask you, they're like, well, Christians, like, the Bible talks about the Bible says that slavery is okay. And like Christians should not be like that mad about this thing because the Bible allows for slavery. Would you have you heard that before? Like as a
I
pastor, I've heard
haven't.
this. Okay. Well, Lexi, maybe you can answer since we talked about this yesterday or 2 days ago.
Yeah. The slavery was different back then, and there was rules around it to protect the slaves. And so I think that's a big difference, is because today, like, they are brainwashed, and back then, it wasn't like torture necessarily, or like, it was hard labor, but it wasn't necessarily, I don't know.
Yeah, it wasn't the same as like chattel slavery or cattle
Yeah.
slavery like we had in the.
And not
when the
saying
slave
that the
trade
slavery
was-
back then wasn't bad.
No, I
But
think
it's
you're-
just
you're-
like it's a different kind of slavery than it is today. And today it's hidden. Back then it wasn't hidden, and so there was a lot more rules and guidelines around it. Whereas today people try to hide it and diminish it
yeah.
instead of saying that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, there's more slaves today. I think it's the stats than there has ever been in
History,
history.
Right. Which is
which is really
crazy
sad.
because everyone's like, oh my gosh, like slavery is horrible. And yet it's still like totally something that's going on right now.
Yeah, and like biblically speaking, like you were hitting on the right stuff. Like the Bible, God, it's revealing to me when I think about like Israel and God, and
The
how He
Israelites?
had specific laws to protect slaves, whereas like around Israel, there weren't any laws to protect slaves because slaves were not treated well. And so the Bible, Jesus explicitly says about divorce in the New Testament, like Moses gave you this law about divorce. He had allowed the Israelites to divorce
Yeah.
women, by giving them a certificate of divorce, which was, the Jews argued that was showing that they had permission. But Jesus said, no, Moses gave you that law so that you would, because you weren't
have a
ready.
chance.
So because you weren't ready to know that divorce was not allowed, and except under these really explicit circumstances. So God gave you this law, giving a certificate of divorce, so that you could basically manage with the circumstances, the cultural context that you were in.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is true of slavery. Like we
Yeah.
see in the book of Philemon that Paul is like basically freeing slaves who are a Christian.
Yeah.
And in the case of both that divorce law and also the laws about slavery, God is putting in laws and making laws that are protecting these oppressed peoples. Like he's protecting the slaves, saying that if you hurt your slave beyond a certain point, you have to release that slave. And every 7 years, you have to release your slaves.
Yeah.
And in this case of divorce, you can't just divorce your wife and kick her out of your house. You have to give her paperwork that says that she's divorced so someone else can marry her, instead of like basically condemning her to a life of homelessness and poverty. Like that. And so those ancient things, like I think, are important for the Christian, because if you see that trajectory of the Bible
Yeah.
and you recognize that God, instead of being a God who's pro-slavery, he's actually a God of liberation. Right. If we look in the Exodus account, God is bringing Israel out of slavery.
Yeah.
And that's why the black church hits on that so much, is because think about their past being in a people group that's enslaved in the Americas. That's a really impactful passage for them. because
Right.
it shows God as a liberating God. And just as he liberates us from physical slavery, he's also liberating us from spiritual slavery through the
Right.
cross
Right.
and through the death of Jesus. So God is a liberating God. And if he is a liberating God for us Christians, like we should be people who are seeking to liberate the slaves. I
Right.
think we should be on the side of the oppressed. I think it
Yeah.
is in Proverbs. Is it Proverbs 9 that says we should speak for those who can't speak for themselves?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so as for the Christian, I think this is any evil, but especially this especially heinous one should be like on our radar as something we're worried about and trying to act against.
Right.
Speaking of,
How
oh,
do you
go
think we
ahead.
should do that?
Yeah, I was gonna. Good job. You're
Beat you
stealing
to
my.
it.
You're stealing my thunder.
Boom.
Okay, Eva. So what should we do about it?
Yeah, I don't know, like
I don't know.
volunteer at Every Daughter or at Yada. We always could use people at Yada. Yeah, and just honestly, just having like caring about it is helpful, and like making other people aware of the problem that it is will lead to hopefully some
Yep.
good things.
So you volunteer your time in some
I
organization.
what?
So you could volunteer your time
Yeah.
in some organization to
Yeah. It would be good.
participate in making this happen. Or
And there's
maybe
also
leading it.
a project that some high schoolers made a few years ago. Actually, I think they were middle schoolers, called the Apricus Project too, which is about sex trafficking. And then they give their money to Every Daughter and Zateo, and I think maybe Yada.
Oh, cool. I've not heard of that, but that's awesome.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us like a story of like something that you've seen at Yada while you've been serving?
Yeah. So we work with this one woman, and she has 4 kids. I love her youngest kid. She's adorable. I like call her my kid because we like have watched her since we were like little, or since they were little, and yeah, she's just so cute. And so their mom she's out of trafficking, but she goes back and forth in between it because she does drugs and like also does like alcohol and stuff like that, which is like the case for most women.
Yep.
They normally have
To numb the pain of
Yeah.
the past.
right. Yeah, they normally like have an addiction that goes along with their already traumatic past. And so her mom, yeah, we met her 3 years ago through Yada, and we've been working with her since then. They were in a really great place like a year ago, and we would like help her with her kids, and she's a single mom, so she has 4 kids, so she was like always asking us to help, and yeah, we did a lot of that for her, but she was doing really great, and so that was really cool to see. But she's not doing so well anymore. But yeah, it's been interesting to like get to know her kids, because you can see that they carry their mom's trauma. Yeah, it's like really sad. It's hard to like see their kids, because if their mom was having a bad day and we would see them, you could tell that they were having a bad day. And so like, even though that they shouldn't have been having a bad day, the way that their mom was reacting to situations was carrying out into her kids. And yeah, her oldest is like 8. And so when the mom goes back into like drug use, their mom will drop them off at like different drug houses. And yeah, it's hard to know that like they're going to a bad situation and not being able to do anything about it, which has been happening a lot recently. So yeah, it's crazy.
How many like women have you helped? For like how many has Yada helped?
Like it's getting up there. It's like 75 now.
Amazing.
Yeah, so we continually have worked with them.
Do you guys like disciple them and like keep like tabs on them?
Yeah.
cool.
So like we'll meet with them, or my mom will meet with them, And then she'll like continue that relationship after
That's
that.
amazing.
And
Is there other people that do that too, or just your mom?
she works with every daughter to do that.
Oh, okay,
Also.
awesome.
So it's mostly my mom with Yada, but she'll work with every daughter to do that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been good, but it's hard to watch for sure.
Yeah, definitely makes you angry.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like watching that little girl like walk out of my house. I'm like, yeah,
I just want to scoop you up. And take
yeah,
you
like
home
I'm
with
like,
me.
you can't go back because like I don't know where she's going. I don't know where she's living right now. Like, and her mom is so like not like moody. I don't know a better word for it, but she'll like say that we don't care about her kids because we couldn't take them one of the days, or like she'll blame us for things that like are happening in her life, and so won't let her kids come to our house and like to see us, and so that
That's
has been
hard.
really hard to like. I haven't seen the little one in like 3 weeks, and yeah, it's heartbreaking to like to
Just
be with
on your
her.
heartstrings.
Yeah, yeah, and it's it's hard.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, what do you do with like those emotions? Like, how do you
I don't
work
know.
through that?
I've like done so many different things. I think that like a lot of the emotions that I have are like obviously like anger, and like hatred. I will be honest, I really do not like the lady at all, their mom, and I've been like trying to work through that, and at the same time being like not like holding on to the anger, but also like realizing that it's not a bad thing to want justice for her kids, but also realizing that like she has been hurt and she has trauma, and that is why she's doing
Yep.
these things, and not because she's just a horrible human being, but because there's like reasons for it. And yeah, and like going to God and like really just being like, okay, here's my anger. I don't know what to do with it right now, but like something needs to happen. And so really trying to, I don't know, put it in God's hands.
It's reminiscent of that passage where somewhere it's written that our war is not against human
Flesh and
beings,
blood.
Yeah.
flesh and blood, but against principalities and
Yeah.
powers of this world. And like, it's sad, but she has been through so much like evil that hasn't really been a consequence of her own
Right.
doing. And she's just a bystander, like hiding behind whom are like way bigger powers than like we could ever address,
Right.
or on our own, in our own power.
Yeah.
And so like in the end, I think you're right. Like it is God that we need to bring into the situation
Right.
and to ask like, God, what do you want me to do? What does it look like to love this person who is so wounded that it's hard to interact with her?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's tough.
I mean, I think love is the answer. I think even loving
Right.
her where she's at, because it's in the Bible it says love covers a multitude of sins.
Right.
So it's like, yes, she isn't necessarily living the life that God wants her to live, right?
Yeah.
But it's also she doesn't know any better. She doesn't know what it means to actually be loved and what love is.
Yeah.
So it's like you gotta continue to show her that so that she knows.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's what all these girls need. It's just someone to show love.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they don't
true
really
love.
know what real love is.
Mm-hmm.
They've been told for years that like someone loves them, or like the person that's trafficking loves them.
And then
And-
they beat them up.
Yeah. They'll beat
Like-
them or traffic them and sell them to other people, and they're like, oh well, that's
They
what
think
love
that's-
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they think that's what love is.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's like, how can you think that's what love is? But but they don't know anything else.
Yeah, and a person coming from a background like that, like how could we expect them to like participate in a relationship that's mutually beneficial and loving? Like it's going to take time
Yeah.
and sacrifice
Right.
from somebody who has a lot to give, and the only people who are going to be able to do that, I think, are the Christian. like
Right.
that has that spiritual fountain that doesn't ever dry up. Like
Yeah.
a secular person could certainly go and do a bunch of great work
Right.
in this field, but it's bigger than what a person can do without God.
Right.
Because then you'll
Right.
just run dry.
Right.
Yeah,
But
you
with
could
God,
give
you
for a
have-
while, but only one person has the water that will leave you not thirsty. It's
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Amen.
So
Yeah, my mom was just at a conference and she was saying that like she was working with this FBI agent that wasn't a Christian. She was like, I don't know how anyone could do this without like the
Oh,
hope
Jesus.
of Jesus,
Yeah.
of him coming back and redeeming the situation. Like she was like, I don't know if I could. Like that would be. It's
There's
just
got to be
so
like
much
trauma in
darkness.
that too.
Oh, for
of just
sure.
like seeing all these things, rescuing these people.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't you just wonder if there's a God
yeah.
out there?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Than would give a good argument for this, but the existence of evil like points to the existence of a great good. So like if you
Right.
if you're looking into this situation and you see that it's just like, wow, this is so broken, and I'm terrified and like so angry. Like
Yeah.
that's my visceral, not even like emotionally, but like my body like recoils at like what I hear and see.
Yep.
Like that's evidence that you were designed for something different, like a good that was outside of yourself and just your subjective emotion
Right.
about that situation. So I think that we should see these situations and be like, man, I need to lean into this and like really do something and make sacrifices
Yeah.
to
Like,
like
what,
bring about
Paxton?
real changes. Well, well, I'll speak as the dude, and then you guys can give some as the women. But I think probably the premier one for most men is, especially in America, is like you should not consume things that are related to this industry. Like the reason why these women get trafficked is because the guys trafficking them or the women trafficking them, because oftentimes it is
Yeah.
women
Yeah.
doing the trafficking too, is that they're getting paid. Like they're making a lot of money to do that work. And so we as men can't participate in giving them our money. And part of that is not watching pornography, because like pornography, the studies have shown it's linked. Like
Yep.
we can't
It
get away with
is.
it. You can say that pornography is like ethically sourced in some places or whatever,
It's
but
not.
It's not. No.
well, even if you did make that hypothetical situation, like the vast majority of pornography is not.
Right.
You know, and so we have to recognize that these industries, prostitution too, like in the red light district in Amsterdam, they said they regulated that, but yet human trafficking is present in that industry. And so we got to ask ourselves, like, is what we're doing contributing to this? Like, and I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And God, as a Christian, like even as a secular person, I think that should be like concerning to you if you're morally inclined. But as a Christian, like God's gonna remember that. Like God, does, you may not think about like
On
where.
Judgment Day.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think the grace of Jesus covers over all the sins of the Christian. But like
I
at the
agree.
same time, we should seek to please God in everything that we do.
Right.
And I don't think it's loving to God to
And
treat
see
his image
and
bearers,
hear.
specifically his women image bearers for many men.
Right.
Obviously, there are boys too involved, but
Yeah.
like we can't allow ourselves to continue to look at women that way and consume that sort of media. For one, for what it does to us, which is a whole nother sermon.
Right.
But for also what it's doing to the women who are involved in the sort of industry that it funds. And it's the same deal for what we buy, which maybe you can talk about in terms of clothes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's cheap things that you shouldn't, I don't know, you shouldn't buy
Yeah.
them. Because there's people who are being forced to do
Make
labor
them.
that they shouldn't be. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that they're enslaved. So like
Yeah.
there are websites out there that will tell you like what shops and stores
Traffic
are using trafficked
Yeah.
kids.
materials or labor to produce what they're doing. So we should be conscious of that. And oftentimes it will, unfortunately, reflect that we have to pay more
Right.
for those goods that we're buying that are ethically sourced or what have you. But the
Yeah.
question is if we can afford it, like sometimes maybe you can't, you know, that's a different question. But if you can, is it really worth that extra $2 for your shirt or whatever it comes down to?
It's a child's life.
Yeah,
I
you
would
could-
say
Yeah.
yes.
Well, like, because the way we're going to stop this is not like we can kick down as many doors for like into brothels as we want. Like, there are ministries that do
Yes.
that overseas, and like
Yeah.
they go and they kick
Yeah.
down brothel doors and they free women from the sex trafficking
Yeah.
industry.
Yes.
But you know what they're going to do? If there's still money to be made, the next day they're going to go out and they're going to find 5 more.
Right.
You know? And
Yeah.
so what really is going to solve this problem, and many problems that are driven by money, is you need to teach people not to buy those goods.
Yep.
Yep.
So that there's no reason for people to traffic those women or men.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So it's the root that needs to stop.
Right. Yeah.
Which is going to require a sacrifice on our part.
On
Right.
everyone's part.
And
it's not just one person, it's
Right.
a nation.
Yeah. And like your money, you spend it in so many different ways. Like it's not that big of a sacrifice to like buy something that's only like $2 more. Like,
I mean,
Or
comparatively,
is
yeah.
it
yeah.
or is it even worth it to buy it? Like, do you actually need it?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Like, especially in America, I feel like we buy things that we don't necessarily need. Like, me and T were talking about this earlier. I was just like, a lot of the things that Americans want, we don't actually need to survive.
right.
And so it's like, I mean, that's also another sermon.
Yeah.
But just like, do we actually need it?
Right. And that's something
Even
that you
if
can
it's
like
cheap.
look at and be like, okay, yeah, this is not something that I need. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is, it's fair to say that it might be like a $2 difference sometimes, but like I hope that we can become the sort of people who are willing to take a sacrifice if it was like meant that we would live significantly less well off.
Right.
That if we knew we, because of the lifestyle we lived, we were able to prevent some level of human trafficking.
Yeah.
Like I hope that in our minds we'd be like, oh, that's worthwhile to me,
Right.
and not think that, oh, well, whatever, that's not that big a deal.
Right.
And the pornography one is like easier, I think, because it doesn't cost you anything. You know,
Yeah.
the cost it costs you is that you have to grow as a person.
Right.
And so, dudes, starts with us. We got, the, I think, the easier, well, probably not easier emotionally, but more something that we can really do, like right now. Like you can stop doing that today, and you might have to continue buying because we're so connected globally. It's going to be hard to get rid of like the evil involved in the products we buy.
Yeah.
That's going to take a long time, but you can stop watching pornography today.
Yeah.
Like, and this
Agreed.
could, that could happen.
Yeah.
And for women too. Like, I know there are plenty of women. If we do have like 100 people listening, there will be multiple women who are addicted to pornography
Yep.
too. And like, same for you. Like, you can get out of that.
Yeah.
Like, there's freedom, specifically in Christ,
Yeah.
that if you can see His love for you, that He could bring about some sort of form of redemption and rescue from
Yeah.
your slavery
Yeah.
to sin. And so it starts with all of us getting free.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're in this physical sin. We have our spiritual sin that we need to break, that our spiritual sin is in some ways holding them in their physical sin.
Right. Yeah.
But God is the freeing God. He's the liberating God.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we can have hope that He's going to bring about that redemption.
Yeah.
But we got to do something about it.
But we do have to do
Agreed.
something about it. Yeah. And I think a good way to like remind ourselves of like it's other human beings is like thinking about it as like, what if that was your sister or your brother or like your
kid.
family member or your kid or like your parent? Like if it were to happen to one of them, like what would you do for them to get them out of that?
And they are our brothers and sisters in Christ.
Right. Yeah.
So they are family.
So they are. You're right. And so
We need to go knock down some doors. Who's ready?
Yes.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Knock
I
on the
say
door
we take
that's-
the youth group on a field trip.
Let's go. Where are we going
India.
first?
Oh, gosh.
Does anyone know where they are?
Yeah.
We're coming after you.
Maybe one day, maybe that's where you're going, Eva. Maybe that'll be you kicking down doors in India.
We'll come with you.
Ooh,
Let's
not
start
India.
with today.
Sorry.
Start with
We'll start in America.
Start with repentance
Yeah.
and changing your own life. Repentance means to turn.
Yes.
So in the ways that you're participating in the system, which there are some, most likely for everybody, turn, live a new life
Yep.
through the power of Christ.
Yeah.
All right, that's a wrap. I'm done. I'm calling it.
Cool.
If you liked this podcast and you want to be a part of it, you may. You can actually join. If you're a student under 18, we'll call it there.
There you go.
And you can come and talk with us about any
Or if
topic
you're
you
a
can
student
pick.
and you are 18 and still in high school, because there might be some.
Yeah, if you're in high
Right.
school or younger, you can be on
Yeah.
it. And you can be like Eva, who crushed it.
Yeah. So
Nailed
cool.
it.
Yeah, so thanks for being on, Eva, and we'll see you guys on the next one.